this is a spreadsheet, and I'm making the spreadsheet available. It's got all the demos in it. This is data, again, from the website. It's actually originally data from Transport for London. What it tells us is over the last 10 years or so, for each of different types of journeys, bus, underground, Docklands Light Railways, a railway in East London, tram, there's about 7 different types of journey, and it gives us roughly each month the number of passengers. So we can see that we're 189.1 million passengers on the kind of month starting of April 2010, and it goes up all the way to there. We're going to bring this data in. This data is actually dirty in lots of ways, and let's bring it in. And what we're going to do, we bring it into Excel, and we're going to clean it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this raw button here, and that shows me the data just as it sits on the website, and as if it was a CSV file on your computer. And if I have I'm going to take in this URL, but what I want you to notice is it's a bit dirty. We've got all these kind of empty columns here, and if we go down, they've got some empty rows down here. So we're going to clean that up, but it also needs to be reshaped as well. So let's get into Excel and let's get started. So I'm in Excel, and what I'm going to go into data, and I'm going to go get data, and I can bring in data from all sorts of different sources here, but I'm really interested in just bringing data from a web link. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to paste in that URL that I've just copied with the TFL data. And what it's going to do is it's going to show me a preview of the data, and I'm going to click on transform data. And what that will do will bring up a part of Excel called Power Query. And this is, I would say, looks really boring, but it's actually really useful. You can see there's a couple of tables there because what I've got is I've got a couple of final versions available so that you can use later on. But here I've brought in this data, and we're going to, first of all, we're going to clean it up. We can have a look at the data, and there's a few things that we need to do. I'll just click on refresh there. First of all, this period and financial year isn't particularly useful to us because it's in the kind of wrong order. It's got the period, this 13 rail calendar period, then the financial year. Well, we've got the period here, and we'd like to extract the financial year. Secondly, what we'd like to do is get rid of all these columns at the end. They're just rubbish columns. And thirdly, if we come down as well, there's those rows that we brought in that we have a look. So we're going to get rid of those. So let me just do something first of all. I will click on view and move column profile out of the way. Good. So let's do the first thing. Let's just choose the columns that we want. So I'm going to go into home, and I'm going to choose the columns. I'm going to come on and say choose columns, and I can choose the columns. So it's got all these columns that I don't want at the end. So I'm just going to choose the columns that I want. There we go. And so if I click on OK, what's happened there, it's got rid of all the rubbish columns. Now, what I want you to notice that down here, there is 182 rows in this data set. We can see that there. And about 13 of those rows have got null values. And so what I'm going to do over here is I'm just going to go to my reporting period, and I'm going to say remove any rows which have an empty reporting period. And now if we have a look down here, we are down, oops, didn't mean to do that. We're down to 169 rows. Good. So we've cleaned the rows. Now if we go back, we've cleaned the columns. The next thing that we'd like to do is we'd like to come over here and we'd like to extract the year. This is the 1011 year. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into transform, and then we're going to go into extract. And I'm going to extract. I'm going to extract the text after a delimiter, and the delimiter I want to extract is that underscore. So it's going to just extract everything after the underscore. And what that does for us is now it gives us the year. So we can see all the years there, which is what we wanted. And what I can do here is I can come along and I can rename that because now it's financial year. The other thing that we might want to do is to come along and look at what we've got here. Is the data's okay now, but it's really kind of strangely shaped, or not shaped in the best way for analysis. we've got all these 7 columns, one for each type of journey. And really, it's the number of passengers. Really, it would be really nice if we had one column that was the journey type, which would be underground or DLR or tram. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select those 7 columns from bus journeys through to TfL rail journeys. And I'm going to come along to my transform. I'm going to unpivot those columns. So now what I've got is my data in a tidy state, much more useful. I can take this column here and group it, filter it, and so on. Now, what it's given me is these 2 columns. It's given me a lot more rows. It's given me these 12 columns. Attribute, better name for that would be journey type. And value, that would be better, but let's call it journeys in million. Great. So our data is looking pretty good now. We've got it cleaned up. We've got it reshaped. We're ready to bring it into Excel. There's just a couple more things that I'd like to do to it. And the first one is that with these, I'd rather than saying bus journeys, underground journeys, DLR journeys, it would be good to say just bus, underground, and so on. So again, I'm going to do the same thing of coming to basically what I was going to do. I was going to go into transform, and I'm going to, where is my extract? Again, I'm going to extract. I now have to be a bit cleverer. I'm going to extract a text before delimiter. And now what I have to say, I'm going to use a space delimiter. But what I have to do is I have to go back from the end, because I've got tram journeys, one word, but I've also got TfL rail journeys. So I want sometimes 2 words I want at the front. So if I work from the back of the input, and I'm going to skip the first one between the journeys, the first space between the journeys and the million. And then if I do that, then what I've got is I've got my journeys as I want them, bus, underground. If I have a look at them, we can see them all there. That looks good. The other thing that I want to do, and now I can do it because I've reshaped my data. What we've got is we've got these periods, and we've got the number of people, passengers, journeys in each period. And some of the periods are 31 days, some are 28 days. And so really, if we want to look at like for like, we want to know the daily passengers. And that would be, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a calculation. We're going to take our journeys, and we're going to add a column. And we're going to add a column by doing a standard mathematical operation. We're going to divide the journeys by a values in column, and that's going to be by the days in the period. So I'll click on that, and I get this column here. So 189 million journeys over 31 days is 6.1 billion journeys per day. So I'll just call this daily journeys. And again, it's in million. So now what I've done is I've got all my data. It's a much better shape, much cleaned up. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this journeys. That's a good name for it, journeys. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do close and load. And that's going to bring the data now into Excel proper. And here we are. What we've got is we've got a table. And this table is the reshaped table that we've just got. Let me just close that up. And let me just have a look at data and close connections. And we brought that data in. And you can see, and now we can use that data. So for example, we can come along, I can go into table design, and I can create Summarise with pivot table. I'll put that onto a new worksheet. And just what I can do is I can look at my daily journeys. And this time I'll because I've created my journey type column, I can put it on there. I can put that on the rows. So I can look at the number of daily journeys. Actually, it's probably best to do our journeys, actually. That would be a better number. The total journeys, and also if I wanted to by the financial year, that's the financial year column that I created. So we reshaped it, and because we reshaped it, we can now do things like pivot tables and things much more easily. Good. So that's the query editor. One of the good things about the query editor is that it is, let me just go back for a moment. If I go back into the Power Query, I edit, even though I did all those operations manually, behind the scenes, the query editor was writing a script. And I'll just show you that script. You never need to look at that script, but I want to prove to you that it's there. There it is. And because it's a script, we've automated it. And if that data changes on GitHub and we just click on refresh, then we will bring that data in again. So we've created an automated script, even though we've just used the UI and done everything manually. Right. That's our query. What I want to do is I want to go on. What we did, Power Query did, is created this thing called a table. If I have a look at that, I can tell it's a table because if I put my cursor in a cell, I've got this thing called table design, a context menu. If I click on table design, notice it created a table for us called journeys. Now, what I'm going to do next is explain why tables are useful and why, in my opinion, you should always put your data in tables. So I'm going to go into table start. What we're going to do here is a kind of before and after. So let's imagine that we've got some data here and the NHS is in the news at the moment, all the news, first, second and third news item. And because of that, here I've got some secret data from the NHS that tells me for 3 London hospitals here, it tells me the forecast for the patients that are going to be admitted over the next few days and the spare beds. Fictional data, of course, but typical data that we should all recognize. We've got data. And the 2 things that we might want to do with that, there's 3 things. First of all, we might want to create a pivot table. So I'll go ahead and I'll create a pivot table on that. So I'll come along and I'll say insert a pivot table and I'll choose my range. This is not yet a table, this is tabular data, and I'll just stick the pivot table side by side. And of course we can do that. And I can look at the patients admitted by the hospital name. The next thing I might want to do is I might want to come on and make a calculation. So I'm going to say capacity. And what my capacity is, I'm going to say equals my spare beds less my patients admitted. And notice that what we get here is we get a formula D7 less C7. This is what we know. Let's see, D7 less C7, let's hit that. And if we want to, I can make it, I can copy that down. And I might say there's no such thing as a negative capacity. So I might just improve my formula to say I can't have negative numbers. That's good. There we go. And I can copy that down. Should I copy that down? Sorry, let me just do that again. Max D7, let's say 7 not. So let me talk about something. So now what I've got, I've created that capacity, but if I come over here to my pivot table, if I refresh my pivot table, I won't see my capacity column. Also, if I add a column to it, say I've got some more data, and again, I'll put in a new hospital here, just so it's obvious Epsom has 10 patients admitted and 20 spare beds. So they'll have a capacity 10, I'll make that 9, so it's obvious. And yet, if I refresh this, it doesn't work because if I look at my pivot table and look at my data source, it's pointing to the original data source. So that's cool. Let's see what happens when I create a table. The other what I'll do is I'll just delete that for the moment. I'll get back to where I started. I'll delete my capacity column and I'll delete my Epsom row. Now, what I'm going to do is with this data is I'm going to create a table. I'll do a Control T or insert table. And it shows this kind of marching ants, these dotted lines, shows me the extent of my table. It's got it right. And it says that my table has headers. So what's it done here apart from created some fancy formatting? Well, I'm going to click on this. I'm going to choose some formatting that's a bit nicer. What it's done is created a table. If I click on here, I can see table design. And it's given that table a name of table 6. That's not a very nice name for a table. So I'm going to change that. And so what I can do now, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to write my capacity. And this time I can do the pivot table a bit easier. I can click on table design. I can go to summarize with pivot table. It knows that that hospital is there. It knows it's the range. I'm going to click on OK. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me just go back to my table start. I wanted it in the same place. I'll do it again. I'll click on table design, summarize with pivot table. This time I will put it on this worksheet just next to it so we can see it side by side. And I can click on, I think, patient submitted by the hospital name. So far, so the same. Let's try something now. Let's start off by adding that capacity column. And what you notice straight away, added capacity, and the formatting is tell you basically the table has extended. I can check that because I can come into the name box for my table and we can see it's highlighted that part. Now, let's write a capacity that calculation again. And what I'll do is I'll write equals max. And what I'm going to say, my spare beds less my patients admitted. And what I want you to notice is that it is giving me there. Sorry, I haven't done that particularly right, but there we go. It's giving me these structured references, spare beds less patient admitted. It's not saying E7, D7 less C7. And so it's a more readable formula for a start. And especially when we've got lots of columns, hundreds of rows. Imagine, for example, that this table has. And so we get a more readable formula. Secondly, I didn't need to copy it down. It copied it down for me. And so let's have a look at another thing. Let's have a look now if I come to refresh my pivot table. We'll notice that this capacity now is in there because now that since the pivot table points to the table. So our pivot table is always up to date. And even if we add another row, let's put in the Epsom Hospital again. I said 9 and 20. We can see that if we look at the capacity there, we can see that we've got a capacity of 30. That's not yet 30, but if I come back and I refresh the pivot table updates. So pivot table, when we do tables and we put pivot tables on top of them, that works really well. The pivot table always reflects the latest table if we add columns or if we add rows. And the other thing that we can do, I'm going to write the simplest formula here. And I can say equals sum. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say the sum of this. And that, again, let me just go in and see that a bit bigger. You can see that it says hospital capacity. It doesn't say E7 to E17 or whatever. And so what we can do, we can write formulas based on columns on the table. And again, those formulas will work. So if I put on, let me just put in another row here, 20th of the 1st. Again, I'll do St. George's and I'll have 5 and 8. Notice that this changes because it's now reflecting there, whereas in the range it wouldn't. So tables are really useful for structured references, for putting formulas. Again, I did the most simple formula possible, but with more complex formula, it works really well as well. And also, if we had a really big table, I want you to watch what happens as we imagine this is not 10 rows, but 10,000 and not 5 columns of 50 columns. As I move this up, here we go. The column names now become the table column names. So instead of A, B, C, D, it's date, name, patients admitted. So I would argue that if we're using data in Excel, what we should always do is use tables. And you'll see me using them in the rest of it. Good. So that's the section on tables. And I want to talk about something that's been hard in Excel. And I hope that this is a formula that you can recognize. By the way, can you still see my screen? Because I haven't got my red board around it. Thanks, Mary, for nodding. Lovely. Hopefully this is something that you recognize. And what we've got here is we've got some data. We've got, say, our January results, our February results, and our March results. Different tables. I put them tiny tables, 2 rows next to each other, but the principle holds if we had much bigger tables. And sometimes we want to kind of year to date. And it's always been quite hard to do that dynamically. But there is a new formula and it's called VSTACK. And I'm going to say VSTACK. And what I can do is I can give it my first array, which is my January data. I can hover over and give it my second array, which is my February data, and I'll give it my March data as well. And if I do that, what I get is it nicely stacked up like this. And that's really useful. What I do, and I'm not going to do it here because with various variations, I want to show we can stack it with column headers. And let me just point out that what we've got here is each tab has got a white tab, which is the kind of start here tab, and a green tab, which has got our final results. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's you can download this file, and afterwards, if you want to explore what I've done, I won't go into every single wrinkle about this, but what I wanted to show clearly was that we've got this lovely VSTACK function. Let me just go to my VSTACK there. Okay. Now, let me just show you what this was ranges, and you're saying, hey, Mark, you told us tables were so wonderful. So let's see what happens if I've got 3 tables of data. And again, if I go down a bit, these are actually tables. Notice if I click on it, again, I get the table design up here. If I click on table design, you can see that this table is called the Jan table. This table is called the Feb table. I'm looking up here, the Feb table, and this is the March table. I'll put the table names there. So again, we can stack data from January, February, March. I'll just say, I'll just come here and I'll say equals VSTACK, and then I can just grab that table. And notice again what it's doing here. If I'll just go in one, yeah, we can go here. Instead of saying the cells, it's saying the actual table name, January table. And so what I can do is I can come over here and I can actually write in the tables, Feb table, whichever I prefer to do, point or click or write in them. So I can put those in, and that's a really nice way of doing it. Now I've got a stack of both of these, and what I might want to do is just take Control-C, and I'll just put my headers in there as well. There is a way as well, if I wanted to just make the point, if I wanted to put the headers in without copying and pasting it, what I could do in this is I can come to VSTACK, grab the whole table, including the headers. We get January table, then we get this all saying, give me the data and the headers, and then I can take my Feb table. It's easy for me to type it, March table, and we can do it that way. So what we've got is we've got our data all combined, which is very nice. If there's a VSTACK, you can probably imagine there's a HSTACK, a horizontal stack. Let me move that out of the way. And again, HSTACK, what I'll do is I'll stack these horizontally. Not quite as useful, but just in case you ever need it, it's there for us. So I can say HSTACK, and what I'll do is I'll stack my January data, my February data, and my March data. And we get it in this kind of horizontal way. Again, sometimes useful, and there it is. So again, what I haven't done, I haven't followed through on all of these, but again, if you want to have a look at the ins and outs of how to do every possible combination, they're there for you in the kind of final version. Okay. Let's come on to summarize data. And what I've got beforehand is I've got, well, we'll start with our hospital data. And what I've done over here is just created, let me just reference this, and I will refresh this. Oops, that didn't work very well, did it? I'll just put my name back in there. There we go. So what I've got is here's just a pivot table as we've done before. But there's lots of disadvantages of pivot tables. Sometimes we want to summarize our data, but pivot tables are too boxy, and we might want to use the kind of Excel functions to do it. So what we can do is we can use the SUMIFS function. So I'll talk about that, then I'll talk about a nicer way of doing it. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say equals SUMIFS. SUMIFS is a newer function than SUMIF. If you know SUMIF, SUMIFS is the function they should have written in the first place. It's better designed and it can take several ranges. So what I'm going to say SUMIFS, And then the name of it was my hospital table. Again, I can just point or click or write it in. And I'm going to sum the hospital capacity. That's the new column I created. And I'm going to sum it where the hospital name and then is going to be equal to, I'm just going to click on this cell because I can't click on that cell. It's actually going to be equal to B4. Let me just click on that B4. Oops. Okay, let's see what went wrong there. Let's have a quick look. With SUMIFS, the hospital capacity where the hospital name is equal to, oh, okay. So let me just do one thing here. Let me just move that over there for a moment. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy these and I'm just going to paste these in. I should have done that. I should have pasted those in. And let's write that form. You're going to sum the hospital capacity where the hospital name equals B4. There you go. And so what we're getting, and again, I can copy that down. And so what we're getting there is we're getting using functions to summarize the data. Again, it's a tiny table, but to prove the point, whereas we're doing the same as the pivot table, but we're using a function approach. Now, there is a better way of doing that, and it's this. Let me just go and rather than copying and pasting this, what I can use is I can use a function called unique. And unique is a function that takes an array. In this case, I'm going to give it my hospital name column. And what it will do is we'll look in that array or in that column name, and it will give me the unique values. Notice it's got Epsom as well because we added Epsom. So that's great. I've got my unique values. And if I wanted them sorted, I could say equals sort, and I'm just going to sort them alphabetically. So I've got my hospitals there in my data, in my table. And what I can do is I can write that SUMIFS, but I can do it in a smarter way. What I want you to notice, and maybe you're scratching your head, is that what I've showed you here is a spilled function. I wrote the function, the formula, into cell E4, but it spilled over, the results spilled over into the surrounding cells. So these spilled functions are very useful. The VSTACK function was the same. I wrote the formula in one cell, it spilled over to surrounding cells. And so that's what's called a spilled function. And what we can see is that there's a kind of blue border around the spilled results. And this time again, so I want to sum where the hospital name, and what I'll do for now is going to be equal to, in this case, Epsom. I could just say Epsom. And I've got the result for Epsom. And of course, what I could do is I could manually copy that down. But better than that, I can say E4 hash. And that says, don't go to E4, go and give me the spilled results from that cell E4, all the hospitals. Because I'm passing a range, a set of values in there, it's going to give me a set of values. So what I've done with a simple formula, I've been able to create something that represents the pivot table, but does it in a very nice way with just a couple of functions here. Yes, and I think St. George, because I'm probably Fernando, I'll come to that in the Q&A. I'm probably pointing to the wrong, I've got various versions of this table here. I'm probably pointing to the wrong table. Let me just come in here and refresh. Fernando question, why is it not pointing? And this is probably pointing to, if I go to pivot table analyze, I won't sort it out here, but it's pointing to my hospital final table. I've got two versions of the table. So I'll do what I shouldn't do here. I'll just point it to my hospital table and let's see if that fixes the problem. Okay, so it's just my bug rather than anything else. And there we go. Hopefully it's fixed it. And you can see that and that agree. So Fernando, I hope that's answered your question. Now, let me show you another data set, a fictional data set, but it's right at the end here. It's called store data. Again, completely fictional data set. It doesn't really matter what it is, but we've got some numbers, sales, and in fact, I'm using quantity. We've got some numbers, and we can want to group them maybe by country. I've got 700 rows in there, but I've got 5 countries I want to group them, and by about 6 different products. This is all fictional data, of course. And of course, what I do, if I can come back to my Summarise, what I can do is, of course, I can do what I've done here is a pivot table on it. But what I want to show you is that we can do this very nicely with the SUMIFS. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with my products. I want the list of my products. So I'm going to say equals unique. And then it's going to be the table there was called store. And I'm going to say store product. And that just gives me the list of my products. Again, just so because this has sorted it, I'll just put a sorting order here. I'll just say equals sort, and we'll just sort them A to Z. We'll wrap that with a sort. Lovely. Now what I want to do is I want to find the list of my countries. So very similar, equals unique, and I'm going to use my store, and this time it's going to be my country column, and that's good. I can do that. So I've got my countries. What I might want to do again, I might want to sort them first next. So I have in alphabetical order. And the final thing, I don't want them as a single column. I want them as a single row. So I'm going to stick that. And again, I can go to this one and I'm going to transpose it. That swaps rows and columns. So I'm going to transpose that. So now what we've got is we've got our column head as our products, just like there, and the pivot table and our countries. Now let's write the formula to get the data. And again, it's a SUMIFS, and I'm going to write it first of all, just for the first one, Amarillo and Canada. So I'm going to say SUMIFS. Again, I'm going to say store, and I'm going to store my quantity. That's my quantity. That's the number I want to sum. I'm going to say where the store, and it's going to be my product, is equal to my Amarillo product, and where the store country is equal to, in this particular case, is equal to Canada. And I'm going to click that. And that's great. I get the 29,232 just like that. Now, what I can do as well, and it's not going to work straight away, is I can come along and I can say, actually, no, I'm not going to go to B14, don't do Amarillo. I'm going to bring back the set of products returned by that. So that's going to, if I just put a hash there, that's the spill operator. I can get it for the entire, all the sales for Canada for all the different products. And if I come along and click on this, C13, I'm hoping to get it for the whole table, but I get this awful thing called a spill function. What's going on there? Well, it's telling me with these dotted dashed line that it really wants to spill the results all into this area, but it can't because right in the middle, I've got this word data. So it can't spill into cells where you've already got, you can't overwrite. So I'll get rid of that data and then I get the numbers. And if I can click on this to Format Painter, and just move them there, you can see we've got exactly the same numbers. So that's an introduction to SUMIFS with unique to get, and you can see how easy it was to do. I'll leave that there. Just want to talk about another thing called linked data. And linked data is another way of making data available for our users. Now, what I'm going to show you, if we go to data, what you might see in the latest versions of Excel is you have this kind of data types. These are called structured data types. Now, Excel gives you some standard data types, currencies, stocks, equities, things like that, and also geography. That's not so useful apart from a curiosity, but your organization in Power BI can publish data sets. So, and make them available in Excel with like this. So that would be much more useful. But what we're going to do is we're just going to use the geography set. And what I've done is I've just written down a list of countries here, and maybe I want to find out something about them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to geography. And what it's going to do is it's found that these are all, it knows about these countries. It's got a little flag for the country. And if we cover over that flag, what we get is this card here, which tells us something about the country, including so and so. And what we can do here is we can say country, okay, what's the area? So I can come to the country, and again, properties, I can say that's the area. So I know that the area is 130,000. I'll copy that down of these countries. Again, I can come along and I can say equals what's the population. Again, that's another attribute. And again, I can find out the populations of each of my different countries. I can change my countries. I can add other countries. Now I'll come along to language, and I'll do the same here. What I'll do is I could do that, or I can just say equals England dot official language. And it will come as no surprise to you that the official language of England is English. Now, when I copy this down, though, we're going to get one little problem, and we're getting this spill error here. And let me talk about why that spill error. It's because Peru has 3 official languages. Let me just delete this here. And it's got 3 languages. So what he tried to do, tried to spill down there, but because Australia also speaks English, Australia said none actually. So what we can do here is we can use a function. Again, I can go over here, and I'm going to go to this one. Yeah, I'll go to this one, and I can use a function that just basically says array to text, and that function will basically put them all in one. So there we go. So we can do that, and I'm going to Control C, Control V. So when we've got several, we can, if we want to, we can spill them, or we can do that. Now, another thing that we can do is we can come along here and we can say equals, find out the capital city of England. I wonder what it's going to be, and I can come to capital city. And I'm going to do that. And what I want you to notice is that this capital city is itself a structured reference. If I hover over it, it'll tell us all about London, including perhaps a nice picture. No, we don't get a nice picture. There you go. And I'll just copy that down. And there we go. We know the capital cities. And because that's a structured one, we can find out again about the leaders. So I'm going to come over to London, and I'm going to say, actually, who are the leaders of London? And we click on that, and we can see it's Sadiq Khan. Again, we get this little problem here because there are 2 leaders in Spain, and we get a field. I'll come to that in a minute. We'll get a field because Australia apparently doesn't have a leader. It doesn't have a language, and it doesn't have a leader. So I don't know what's going on in Australia. Now I've done all that, and you're going to say to me, Mark, why shouldn't you use tables? And again, I can use a table to do it. So I'll quickly do that and show you that. Again, I'm going to come over here to the country. I'm going to tag them all as countries. And then again, if I want to say equals this dot area, again, it copies down. I'll leave population because I'm running out of time. I'll say equals this dot official language, and again I can array to text it, and I only need to do it on one of them, and because it's a table it will know to copy it to all of them. It expects the same calculated column to be in all tables. What I'll do as well is I'll come over here, I'll say equals, and I'll finish it off and sort out that last thing. England, oh no, we want to go to London, don't we? We want to go equals England dot capital city. And actually what I'll do is I'll leave it there, because in the last 3 minutes, I was going to finish a quarter. I just want to summarize. So basically what we've seen is we've seen using Power Query to bring in a data set and clean it up. We've seen using tables and creating a table. And what's good about that is we can have formulas that reference the table, and we can have pivot tables that also reference the table as well. Let me just stick name in there. There we go. And as the table expands, columns and rows, both the formulas and the pivot tables change. We've seen stacking data with the new VSTACK function. Again, one of those build functions. We can stack it with ranges, but if our data is in tables, then the formula here becomes very nice. Finally, we've seen summarizing data, and to show this, we're able to use SUMIFS, and if we use the SUMIFS with spill ranges, then we get a formula. We just need to write that formula in one place. No need to do all the bother about mixed references, and it will just spill through to the rest of it. And finally, I've shown linked data, possibly useful if you've got a certain sort of organizational data, maybe hospitals or patients or whatever, and you want to kind of allow people to use this way of clicking on. Given you've got a unique thing like a country, you can see lots of details about them. People can do that very nicely. Okay, so it's 1 minute before 2:15. I will thank you all for your attention. I'll let you go for lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever.